a better person than I knew I was.
Hey folks, let's spend some time with friends up north. Pat Kreitlow of Up North News is on Lake Minnesota. Kristin Lyerly and OBGYN is on the Fox River. And up on Lake Minocqua is Kirk Bangstead of the Minocqua Brewing Company. Wherever you are, welcome. You're up north.
Won't you let me die happy, 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 happy. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome to the Up North podcast. I'm Kirk Bangstead, and joining me tonight is the wonderful and fabulous and my good friend Kristin Lyerly, and I believe Pat Kreitlow is in somewhere really warm right now, and he's not joining us. Do you know where Pat is, Kristin?
I do. He sent me a picture today. I was driving through Chippewa Falls, and it was icy and gray and about as ugly as it gets, and I said, you should really be appreciating your vacation knowing that it's like this at home. And he sent me a picture of himself with a monkey on his shoulder. He's in Costa Rica. Dude,
I didn't know he was in Costa Rica. That's where I do generally go. I'm in Madison right now, and I'm cold as cold. So, what have you? I haven't seen you since 3 weeks ago. Maybe a month ago. Did you have a good holiday? Are you back in the saddle? What's going on?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a weird holiday. I did a lot of working. So I actually worked over the Christmas holiday, and we celebrated like before and we celebrated after. And so it was a little bit of a different kind of holiday, but it was kind of neat to do it that way because then we didn't have that holiday crush. So we got to just enjoy it and savor it a little bit more.
You mean working like delivering babies and doing the procedures and stuff in Hibbing? Don't you have to go to Minnesota now to be a OBGYN because of Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. Well, we've got this 1849 criminal abortion ban here in Wisconsin, which sounds pretty simple, like, just don't do an abortion. But OBGYN is complicated, and abortion is not a binary issue. It is it's an individualized issue. It's a patient-focused issue, and it makes it really hard to take care of our patients. So I kind of had to put my foot down, and, they need a lot of good docs in Minnesota, and that's where I'm helping out right now.
That is, we're not going to talk too much about Roe and reproductive rights today. We're going to talk about gerrymandering, but I can't believe, it's you and so many others, really talented doctors now have been sidelined in Wisconsin. It's just so absurd. I shake my head every single time I think about it.
Well, I mean, COVID happened. There was a physician crisis before COVID, especially in rural areas. And then COVID happened and a lot of docs just left. And now with what's happening in Wisconsin, doctors of all different specialties are wondering to themselves, is it worth it to practice in a state that actually wants to apply criminal penalties for doctors who are practicing good standard of care, thoughtful medicine? And this is not just OBGYNs, it's emergency medicine docs, it's family medicine docs, it's midwives. So this is a really big deal. And, we've got to fight for it. And that's what we're doing. And that's why we're pushing so hard. And we're going to talk so much about things like the state Supreme Court race that's coming up.
Absolutely. So part and parcel of electing a progressive judge to the state Supreme Court will be getting women's reproductive rights back. But that's not the subject for tonight. In a minute after we play some great music, we are going to talk to Jim Santelle, who's a former United States attorney, who's a friend of mine and a friend of the show. And we're going to talk about how, if we elect a progressive Supreme Court judge, what happens next? How can we actually reverse the terrible maps that have kind of done away with decent democracy in Wisconsin? So after our short break, we are going to come back. Stick with us.
Freedom, that's all I ever am.
always pick these pieces that just have so much depth to them? Like, we could do a whole show about the music that you pick. But we won't. But we won't.
Well, that was redemption song, because we're going to talk about redemption tonight. How we can Wisconsin can finally redeem itself from terrible maps that took away democracy from our state in a large way in 2010. But before that, Kristin, I know you really want to introduce our next guest.
I do. I'm so excited to be back here with Jim Santelle. Jim is a former U.S. State's attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. And before he did all this work for the Department of Justice, he served as rule of law coordinator and as a legal advisor at the United States Embassy in Baghdad during the Iraq War. Very interesting. Jim is a Wisconsinite through and through, except for that little stint that he spent at the University of Chicago Law School. Jim, we're so excited to have you back.
And none of us is perfect, Kristin. We're so glad to be with you tonight. It's an honor to be with you once again.
Okay, Jim. So I remember you wrote to me randomly after one of my poignant emails where I just like leave it all hanging out, on a Sunday, and I try to talk about Wisconsin, and
as
you
Kirk
wrote
is known to do all of those things.
So you wrote to me, and we became fast friends because we agree on a lot of things, even though we come from different backgrounds and different parts of the state. So I wanted to set the stage for all of the folks listening tonight and on the podcast later. Before we talk about what we do to get rid of gerrymandering, can you just remind us how we got to where we are today? I think many national papers and media outlets have said we are the most gerrymandered state in America. Tell us how we got there.
How did we get there? And yes, it's recent history, but it's also far past history. Traditionally, what happens in a perfect world, absent partisan decision-making, which unfortunately we do not have today, you'd have the legislature, the Wisconsin legislature, the Assembly, and the Senate, drawing some maps. It would go to the governor. And again, if everybody agrees that the maps, the lines as drawn are appropriate, the governor signs it and we're done with the process. That apolitical, nonpartisan situation has not been the rule in our state, many other states for a long period of time. So what happened here recently is that the state legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, came up with a set of maps, some lines that they drew, and as did many other groups. You recall this very well. All your listeners, Kirk and Kristin, remember this well. There were groups of people very appropriately soliciting comments and questions from groups all around the state of Wisconsin, proposing different kinds of maps, different lines that would hopefully eliminate gerrymandering on both sides of the political aisle, and you'd have truly, or maybe not perfect, but closer to fair elections. So what happens last year in 2021, and now almost 2 years ago, what happens is that when there's not a disagreement, of course, where do you go? You go into the courts, right? And traditionally, once again, it's been the federal courts that have handled that on the notion that the federal courts are a bit more distant from the state politics, and they should render a decision that's maybe not perfect, once again, but independent of that kind of partisan politics that might generate an inappropriate result. What happens here in 2021 is that this is brought to the Wisconsin Supreme Court almost immediately through some procedural mechanisms and machinations that, again, we can go into it.
Jim, say it like it is, man. That was shady business. It was shady
Absolutely.
business.
It jumps over all kinds of procedure that normally you'd go into a circuit court, you'd go into court. The Supreme Court takes this up very, very quickly. And again, in the interest of time here tonight, simply say that, okay, we're going to decide what the maps should look like in Wisconsin. Way back so early on, in November 30th of 2021, the Wisconsin Supreme Court issues a 4-3 decision. 4-3 decision says, you know what, we're going to take a look at these maps. We're going to make a decision based upon the least change approach, which is a legal principle that's not been out there before. They just sort of announced it and said, we're going to do this. It's going to be a least change approach from the past. And an awful lot of people appropriately thought, well, gee, if you're not going to change a lot of things, that means we're going to stay with the maps gerrymandered as they are, right? And there was great concern about this. But nonetheless, the Supreme Court solicited all these maps from various groups, including from the legislature, including from the governor, Governor Evers. Everybody submitted their maps. And much to our surprise, after that initial November 30th decision, on March 3rd of 2022, Justice Hagedorn joined the court's liberals on the court and basically said that the Evers maps were the best example of least changes because they moved the fewest number of voters from one district to another. Again, a surprise. And so we assumed, all right, we're going to go ahead with the governor's maps. Not to be outdone, the Republicans then take that decision and run to the United States Supreme Court and challenge that decision of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Along the way, Brian Hagedorn, in his decision at the Supreme Court level, has said there are good reasons to believe that a 7th majority Black district in the Milwaukee area is needed to satisfy the Voting Rights Act. He made a comment about that. The Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, seizes on that and says that Justice Hagedorn's application is wrong. His approach is wrong. On-site opinion in March, the Supreme Court, a majority opinion, says that drawing districts based on race first required that a Voting Rights Act violation be found. Again, has to do with all these machinations. Once again, voting rights. Supreme Court basically said, we're sending it back to the Supreme Court, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, because they didn't do it right. And again, and yet another change, everyone thought, well, maybe Justice Hagedorn will do what the Supreme Court told him to do and make the right findings, make that kind of analysis of the Voting Rights Act, and he doesn't. And what happens is that the majority of the Supreme Court, again, a 4-3 decision, basically says we're out of time. We can't do this again. This is March. We have April 15th coming up. The candidates are scheduled to begin circulating nominating petitions. And as a result of the timing on this, Chief Justice Ziegler, now writing for the majority, says the legislature's maps are superior to those of the governor and other alternatives out there. Under the record presented before us, she said, and with the clarification from the United States Supreme Court, we conclude that the legislative proposal is the only legally compliant map setting. And that's how we get here. Back and forth, Supreme Court, state of Wisconsin, and federal court. And now we have these maps adopted by the Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin, crafted by the Republican legislature.
So in 15 seconds, Jim, there's been 4 complete subterfuge cheating areas that I heard you talk about. First, it was least change, which was completed out of thin air. That was the Wisconsin Supreme Court cheating on us. Then yes. The second cheat was this. The first one was them wading into the issue at all. The Supreme Court shouldn't have waited. That was the first cheat. The second was the least change doctrine out of thin air, cheat.
Made up.
The third was that Supreme Court weighed into this thing and did reverse discrimination and didn't want to add too many Black districts, which doesn't make any sense at all. That's a third cheat. And then finally, they just give the worst maps to the Republicans as the answer to the Supreme Court's do-over. 4 cheats. Exactly. It's unbelievable.
And that last one is arguably the most significant, right? Because even if a superior court tells you, gee, you did it wrong, that's what judges should do. That's what we should expect our appellate judges to do. Wrestle with the tough questions. Yes, you have to spend, I know they spend late nights doing all this, but this notion that we're running out of time, so we're just going to pick one. No, do that analysis, burn the midnight oil, get this done in time, get us a map situation that makes sense, and do it, again, as Justice Hagedorn would have said, that would have created this additional district in the south side of Milwaukee, and that would, whether it's under a voting rights analysis or a simple fundamental fairness analysis, gotten us a better situation. You're absolutely right, Kirk.
So are we stuck with these maps? How long are we going to have these maps, which are actually worse than the maps that they came from?
Absolutely. It was not the least change. Well, we've had a worse situation. Exactly, Kristin. And so the answer is, and I think this is why we're gathering together tonight, is to talk about what a remedy is. The short answer to the question, believe it or not, coming from me, long-winded me, is that typically you'd wait 10 years. The next time this happens is in 2030, a new census under the Constitution, and we're stuck with that for the next 7 years or 8 years or so. Not necessarily so, and I think this is what our discussion is going to be about. Is there a mechanism now, in the wake of having one experience in November of last year, of deciding, voting under this new map situation? Do we have people who've been disenfranchised, politically, under other theories, under these new maps, such that you can go back into a court and say, you know what, this is violative of our fundamental rights. And even though they've adopted by the Supreme Court, now we've got some clear proof, some clear evidence to suggest those maps are in fact disenfranchising portions of our population.
And of course, we've seen that our current Supreme Court, which is 4-3, very conservative, has not given us the results we want in terms of fair maps. However, that's what we're talking about tonight, is that we have an opportunity to flip the Supreme Court numbers to 4-3, on the progressive side. Now, I don't say progressive meaning Democrat. I say progressive meaning not in the hands of the Republican Party, because the 4 justices that we've seen, 3 at least, Hagedorn kind of flips sometimes, have shown they are almost in the pockets of the Republican Party. Whereas we say progressive judges, but honestly, I haven't come across these judges to be that partisan, but I do sense that they care about fairness.
Right.
So the question is, Jim, we've got about 3 minutes before we talk to Kelly in the next segment. The question is, when we talked about this, we're like, okay, if we elect a progressive Supreme Court judge, we can relitigate this. What's the easiest way? It involves our Attorney General, right?
Right, absolutely. And again, the Attorney General, any Attorney General, regardless of his or her politics, represents who? Represents the people of the state of Wisconsin, right? Fairness, decency, rule of law. And so Kirk and Kristin, we've all had these conversations before. The Attorney General should be on the side of right, not only historically, but presently, and should do those things now that ensure that we do, in fact, have fair voting. That certainly is an option at any time to go in. You still have to find the basis for doing that. You've got to articulate a cause of action. But as the Attorney General, you do have that authority on behalf of the people who elected you there to speak on behalf of the people and say, this is what I'm doing as the chief law enforcement officer of our state. And we're advancing this. You can bring it into a circuit court, goes up to an appeals court, and ultimately, again, your point, Kirk, end up before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The Attorney General has that kind of broad power to do this in this and many other areas, environmentally, education, healthcare, all kinds of things on behalf of the people. And
I agree with that. However, I wrote an essay, and I think it's just my own opinion, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, Jim. I'm not so sure that Attorney General Call will be the one that takes us to court. And regardless or not, I mean, he's done a lot of great things for Wisconsin, but I think he's lagged behind other attorney generals, let's say in Michigan, who were ahead of the Roe v. Wade issue. The other attorney generals in swing states are trying to do more to prosecute people that in the insurrection. So I'm not exactly sure that Attorney General Call is the one to lead this. That's why we want to talk in the next segment about other ways, plan B, so to say, that citizens of Wisconsin, just just a natural way, might have recourse to sue. So that's what, and that's going to lead us out. Sorry, Kristin, I wanted you to lead us out of this one, but I think I accidentally did myself. That's going to lead us to the next segment. So stay tuned, everyone, and we're going to talk about ways that people themselves can change the course of our state's democracy.
And indeed they can.
Won't you let me die?
This is the end of Redemption song, obviously.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early.
Oh, the Edmund Fitzgerald is such. Have you ever been to the Shipwreck Museum?
Superior, they said, never gives up her dead.
There's a shipwreck museum in the UP, and they stream that over and over and over again, and you can't get it out of your head. It's really pretty remarkable. And they've got like bits and pieces from the Edmund Fitzgerald. But I'm getting off on a tangent here because we are here to welcome Kelly Westlund, who is a Democrat who recently ran for state senate in the 25th district, which is on the shores of Lake Superior, Douglas, Bayfield, and Ashland counties. Before she ran, Kelly served as Tammy Baldwin's Northwest Regional Representative since 2015, and she has been an active community leader in northern Wisconsin for the last 2 decades. Kelly, thanks for joining us again.
Great to see all of you. Nice to meet you too, James.
Great to see you, Kelly.
You guys couldn't be in more polar opposite places of the state of Wisconsin. That's for sure. Jim being,
and that's the beauty of Wisconsin, right?
Okay, so Kelly, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much. You've been a constant fighter, even north of me, and I'm pretty north for Wisconsin, and you fought hard again, but I think the gerrymander got the best of you on the last election. What do you think?
It was a tough race, and I'm not going to lie. The spread was, kind of a surprise, even given the new district lines. However, in kind of my experience, at least going back and kind of comparing what happened this year to what happened in the last midterm, I don't know that the maps were all of it. I think that there are some other things that we can kind of do depending on, how this might move forward at the state Supreme Court, or, how things might change before the next time around.
So I agree with you, because the real gerrymander of your district came in the last decade, where they seemingly split, Douglas County in two. And just for all of our viewers, Douglas County, Bayfield County, Ashland County, all voted 55% for Mandela, who was a losing Democratic U.S. Senate candidate. So if you're the word, he's not going to get the I don't even know what Evers got, but arguably he got more votes because he actually won. But those 3 counties are all next to each other. They all are right up against Lake Superior. And Kelly, I want to ask you: do you think that your district looks like a horseshoe? There's like a jigsaw puzzle in the middle. When everything looks like a jigsaw puzzle, it's not good for voting rights, because there's no reason to make a jigsaw puzzle in a district. What happened? I mean, I guess the ultimate argument is there's 3 counties there. Superior is the biggest city in that area. There's a Republican senator now, and there's 3 Republican assemblymen. Do you think those 3 counties deserve at least 1 Democratic assembly person?
Well, I sure think so. I mean, I might be a little biased, of course, but I don't know how many folks watching were super familiar with the layout of the district before the latest go round. You're right. Things did change 10 years ago when they drew the new district. It's a district that's been held by Democrats since mid 80s, close to 40 years now. And at that time, Janet Bewley was running to hold the Senate seat from the 25th. And when they changed the maps, they made it a much tighter margin than it used to be. She was still able to pull it off, but it was a much, much closer race than it had been in the previous iteration. And for this time around, she was serving as the Senate minority leader, and they were coming for this one, trying to get that Senate supermajority, right? And what they did essentially is took out Lac du Flambeau on the eastern side of it, so that tribe was completely removed from the district, and they added in more of Burnett County, which is more of a red rural area. So that's what shifted the whole Senate district. As for the 74th, which is what ultimately divided Douglas County, that's what they got in exchange for Lac du Flambeau. So all 3 of these districts, and if you look at the current map for the 73rd, which was previously held by Nick Milroy, I mean, it looks like this crazy dinosaur thing. It's clearly a map that was drawn to benefit one party. And now you're right, these 3 counties that have been this blue holdout up north for decades that don't have that kind of representation anymore. So I've got some questions like, is the population really just changing that much? Is it that the Senate district is only up in midterms and those, maybe aren't as favorable to Dems given, recent experience? And then what I'm seeing so far is that the biggest change from 2022 going back to look at 2018 is the sheer amount of outside spending. People living in this district have never seen this level of spending. I mean, people that were getting 20 and 30 attack ads, like mailers, a day in their mailbox, constantly on the airwaves, on your phone, on your television. It was like, people here were so frustrated by the end of it. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually turned people off from participation at all.
Yeah. And you're not alone. I'm in the 8th congressional district, and I made this map the other day that I'd like to share with you. That's the 8th congressional district in yellow. Can you see it?
Sure.
Do you see those 2 little blue spots right there? Those are the assembly districts that are represented by Democrats. The whole rest of the yellow is all Republicans, congressional, Senate, and assembly seats. That entire section. And it's because of gerrymandering.
Yeah. I know. Well, after all these years of having, Beth Myers, Janet Bewley, and Nick Milroy, at least up in this northern part of the district, the 75th hasn't had a Democrat since Stephen Smith almost 10 years ago now, actually. It looks so sad to see the map of Wisconsin where the furthest north the blue districts go is Eau Claire. Thank goodness for Jeff Smith and Jody Emerson.
Seriously. And they didn't have easy races either.
No.
So what did the district look like with the Fair Maps Commission maps, and how would that have helped you?
That's a good question. So those ones, I know that the people that held all kinds of public input sessions, they asked about how communities are connected. They tried to kind of keep it more condensed instead of where it's got these like weird drawn out edges to try to connect completely disparate, parts of the world. And from what I saw, it would shift it a little bit in that, in the 25th, I've gotten so used to working with folks in Rice Lake and Barron County, for example, where their version wouldn't have included Barron County in the 25th. So it moves it up a little bit further north, but I think that makes sense. There's a lot, it's a huge region. It's the largest Senate district as it is, right? Mm-hmm. So just the diversity of like concern or industry or whatever really varies across this district as it is.
Obviously there's not a lot of people, so you're going to have a broad swath of northern Wisconsin, but you do share lots of things. The tourism associated with Lake Superior, the shipping to a certain degree. But the tribes, and I want to get into that because Jim was talking a little bit about that as well. If I'm mistaken, the Lakota tribe in Hayward is an Ojibwe nation, and so is the Lac du Flambeau tribe, which is close to me in Minocqua. And both of those, it's different reservations, but it's the same Ojibwe tribe that we're talking about. There's also the Red Cliff tribe, and what's the other one up there?
Bad River, and there's also St. Croix further west.
So that new Senate district that had the Fair Maps Commission, that Evers commissioned not to be partisan. That's why he brought in everybody he possibly could around the state. It was like, let's do it the way that people want it. It's a
novel idea. Huh?
Go figure. The way they do it in Iowa. I don't know if it helped Iowa, but anyways, the way they do, there's a template. But
what could really help Iowa, though? Let's be honest.
So the question is this, though: like, at least didn't they get that Senate district to at least cover the tribes, which have obviously very similar interests, especially if they're in the same nation, which is Lac du Flambeau and Lakota. That is not, go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and importantly, they're all also within ceded territory. So when it comes to things related, especially to natural resources management, that's something that is a really important discussion that they often have with their representatives in Madison. But I don't have the maps that the Fair Maps Commission did in front of me, but I believe that their proposed version of this district would have kept Lac du Flambeau, Bad River, Red Cliff, and Lakota in one district. St. Croix is a little bit further west where it would have just, had to stay out. But I think that the way that it is now, this 25th has tribes that don't work together as closely as Bad River, Red Cliff, and Lac du Flambeau do oftentimes. So to me, I feel like the folks that are in Lac du Flambeau have really lost any opportunity that they might have had before to have representation that listens to them, that works with them. I'm not sure who is that the 12th district that they've been moved into now. And I don't know about what the rest of the land of that district looks like, but I can't imagine it's going to be electing a Democrat anytime soon.
So let's bring it around to, like, we've identified the problem, but Jim, you get this. From a legal perspective, is there standing here for some sort of a lawsuit to rectify this gross malrepresentation?
Sure. And so when I listened to Kelly speak tonight, I'm thinking about just that, Kristin. So she's identifying individuals, she's identifying groups of people who, as a result of the line drawing that we talked about in the first segment, may well have been disenfranchised. When we talk about gerrymandering, which, by the way, comes out of Eldridge Gary from our founding fathers, and we talked about it as a dinosaur. At that time, it was a salamander. So maybe you're talking tonight a whole new way of thinking, dinosauring in some way. But get back to the fundamental point here. The issue is whether or not today, in the wake of these recently recrafted lines, there are members of those tribes, the Coudray, Lac du Flambeau, others, and beyond that, citizens generally, again, understanding that those are nations in our country and in the state of Wisconsin. They have independence, they have great importance, and Kelly, as you just said, they also have a commonality of interests and commonality of focuses. There are others out there who could likewise say, because of the way that these maps were drawn, again, gerrymandering, getting back to that concept, it basically involves cracking or packing. In this case, when I hear Kelly talk, I'm hearing cracking. That is dividing up populations in such a way that they cannot possibly be the majority in the remaining districts. And so you get exactly what Kelly described tonight, which is the impossibility of any of those groups that do have, as nations, kind of a unified notion about who they should be represented by. They can't possibly be represented in the state. And so you look at that cracking and you say, that is in violation of our fundamental notion about representation. Those people, whether they're parts of the Native American, again, 11 of them in the state of Wisconsin, federally recognized tribes, whether part of those nations, part of other communities, other areas, you identify people who can say that as a result of those lines in this last election, maybe future elections as well, I have been disenfranchised because I no longer have the representation of the sort that Kelly has described tonight. That is standing. I've suffered a harm. It's cognizable, to use the lawyer word. It's something I can go to court. I can show it on a graph. Kelly can come in and testify about these things, and can others. You do have to have individuals or groups of people who are plaintiffs in the case. But my guess is, from what Kelly has said, and what Kirk, you've said, and Kristin has said, others have said tonight, you probably can identify them without too much difficulty, especially now, as we said in the first segment, you've got a track record of having a voting procedure that we just concluded in November. And we can see the results of that and the representation now in the state legislature, or the lack of it. That's standing.
Gotcha. Thanks, Jim. So, Kelly, here's the big question. I know that you've you worked terribly hard to represent, constituents in the 25th. You were knocking doors. We talked to you right before the election. You and Laura were on. And do you have it in you, if we elect a progressive judge, to lead the charge and bring a lawsuit for the good people of the northern Wisconsin to try to get our fair maps back?
I feel like I should consult a lawyer about that.
You find a good one somewhere. I'm not sure
Right?
where that person would be. But
We need somebody up there to do it. I think it should happen in Superior, Ashland, and Bayfield. That's what I think.
And it's there. People here were just like, flabbergasted. It's been so long that we've had good, reliable representation, and even though it was in the minority, it was like, well, at least I've got a good one. And now, we'll have to wait and see what our new representatives do. But I'll just say that I'm not optimistic. In the meantime, we're all going to get together and continue doing that door knocking, that hard work to get people to turn out for the spring election, because we really, really need a progressive person on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. there's no, I mean, even if this issue aside, we need them there for a lot of reasons if we're going to get Wisconsin back on track. And other than that, we've got to really start paying attention to what the right is doing as they're recruiting people for every single local office. They're building the bench, they're getting people engaged. And, even if you don't have the qualifications to run for county clerk, they're going to find somebody to do that. You know what I mean? So we need to make sure that we're leaving no race uncontested. We've got to get people to sign up to these local roles, to be a part of government. Because that's just it's so important for us not to.
You are so right, Kelly. And I think many of us felt when all of the Fair Maps efforts were not giving us the result that we wanted to see, I think many of us lost hope for a little while and felt like, well, here we are at the end of the road and we failed. But the truth is, there are plenty of other things we can do. Run for local office, run for state office, consider whether you were disenfranchised and do you have standing and could you bring a case? There are so many opportunities that we have to try to right Wisconsin. So Kirk and I just want to say thank you, Jim Santelle. Thank you, Kelly Westlund, so much for joining us tonight and helping us understand this problem and think about what the future will look like.
Thanks.
Always a pleasure. Good to see you. And
All right. See you guys. We'll check you out soon.
Thank
take
you.
care. Good to see you, Kelly.
You too. Take care.
Put on the whole
Journey.
Journey Escape album and Stone in Love. Let's go.
So obviously, I mean, when I thought about, okay, how do we do the redemption? How do we end this show? And it's
here we go. Deep thoughts with Kirk Bangstead, everybody.
Think about, I mean, yes, democracy, we could get it back and we would welcome it with open arms and we might sing a little Journey along the way. And I just thought about what it would be like if we could, actually have a Wisconsin that wasn't so broken by both gerrymandering, obviously too much money in politics, the ALEC Association that writes bills for us for Republicans at a national level and just passes crazy things. We might get the Wisconsin that both you and I grew up in.
This isn't us. This isn't our people. Wisconsin is progressive. Bob LaFollette progressive. Wisconsin was the birthplace of the Republican Party, which was the Democratic Party back then. I mean, it formed out of abolition and unity. Wisconsin was the place that recognized that we needed a state income tax. So how are we going to make that happen? Wisconsin was the place who said, workers' comp, great idea. Let's protect our people. This is not our Wisconsin.
Yeah. The Wisconsin I grew up in, at Stephen's point, was a Wisconsin where legislators, while they differed in ideas, still got together and at least passed bills and had enough taxes to make our roads, had nice roads. We at least charged enough in property taxes to have good schools in every part of Wisconsin, not just urban areas. In the rural part, we had good rural schools, and we didn't have people trying to tear down our county, our municipal clerks, and with election denying. Like we got to this place, and through trickery, through cheating, and through divisiveness, and it came from the right. It did not come from the left. The left obviously are more polarized now because we're like back into a corner. But we can get this back if we focus on the next two elections. And tell us what we got to do, Kristin.
Well, I think we have to be courageous. We have to recognize where we can step up and where we can make a difference. And it's on every level. Like Kelly was saying, we're seeing people running for all of these local offices that don't actually care about local government, but they're just being put up to it and they're being funded instead of running for school board because you've got a kid in school and you recognize where your voice could make a difference, or you have been talking with your neighbors and you want to make this change in your city. There are so many places where our voices are needed, and we have to find the courage to use them and to support each other.
I agree completely. I want to point out the two most important areas that we've been leading to for most of the show that we need to get out and vote. And the first one is in less than 6 weeks, almost exactly 6 weeks, and that's February 21st. The reason this is so important is nobody knows that there's a primary election for these Supreme Court judges on February 21st, and that's why we're trying to talk about it on this show, and so many other people are trying to get the word out. Nobody really thinks about voting in February.
Did you know, I honestly didn't know until last year that Wisconsin has 4 elections every year. 4. We send people to the polls 4 times a year. The primary, the nonpartisan primary in February, the nonpartisan general in April, the partisan primary in August, and the partisan general in November. But we're not paying attention. Most people don't vote, especially in the nonpartisan primary on February 21st.
I don't even know if I've ever voted in a nonpartisan primary in February, and I've been involved in politics. But I know, because I've been talking to Pat and you and other folks, that there are 4 candidates for Supreme Court justice, and 2 of them are backed by progressives, and the other 2 are deeply in the pockets of conservatives. And so only 2 people out of 4 get advanced after this primary. So unless progressives, unless people who care about fair maps, who care about democracy in Wisconsin get out to vote in this primary, there is a chance, and it's not a big chance, but it's enough of a chance to lose sleep over if you love Wisconsin, that their 2 conservatives could both win. And then we wouldn't even have a shot on April 4th. And it's not because Wisconsinites don't care. It's because they didn't know there was a primary.
Yes, you're so right. And those 2 conservative justices, by the way, Dan Schaefer reported today, he tweeted that they didn't go to Harvard or Yale. They went to the Christian Broadcast Network University for their law school education. That's Pat Robertson's university. I mean, it's not the UW. It is obviously a very biased background, which should be very concerning to all Wisconsinites.
Wait, both of them did?
Yeah.
Or was that Kelly? They both went to the same law school?
That's what Dan Schaefer was reporting.
Well, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, we know that the current setup, especially Rebecca Bradley has made so many just shouts of political theater from the bench that we've had professors emeritus from UW-Madison on the show talking about how they've never seen this type of writing coming from the conservative side of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So it is, so it's February 21st. Everybody needs to get out and vote. I am endorsing, the Monaco Brewing Company is endorsing this. I'm not putting words in Kristin's mouth. I'm endorsing Janet. Man, it's hard to pronounce her last name. Prosekowicz, I believe, because I think she's got the best chance of voting, and I think we all need to step up and vote for one in order to get somebody through. But anyways, it's February 21st. So please get out and vote.
Kirk, do you know what you could do right now?
What?
Everybody listening to this podcast right now who lives in Wisconsin could go to myvote.wi.gov and register for their absentee ballot. You have to do it every year. So you have to re-register. So January has started. Get in there, click the button. I promise you, it'll take 2 minutes. Register. You will get your ballot in the mail. And then you're going to vote. You're just going to do it. So do it right now. Do it for Kirk.
There you go. Thank you, Kristin. And I think that with that call to arms from our strong friend, Kristin, that ends our show tonight. Next week, however, Kristin and I will be back. I'm not sure if Pat's going to be back by then. We might invite Jim back because we were going to talk to Jason Bissonnette, who is the Dean of Students at the Le Coup de Ray College in Hayward.
Kirk, you're trying to drum up some trouble here.
What?
I have this feeling that you are trying to like drum up some trouble here. I'm listening to this podcast while I'm talking. I see what's going on.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing in northern Wisconsin. So we're going to talk about the tribes and how they have standing to potentially override this crazy gerrymander we have. So
yes,
Kristin, thank you so much for coming, and thank you all for listening. And we will see you next week. Appreciate your time.
One, two, three.